Good morning and most welcome to 1758 of the series. We will today continue with Stephen Affeldt, Captivating Pictures and Liberating Language, Freedom as the Achievement of Speech in Wittgenstein's Philosophical Investigations. And I've been putting my head into rather extensive the picture view of the world as proposed by Wittgenstein. So I'm simultaneously reading Fisher, Baker, and there's a third name, Mulhall. They're all very interesting, and the picture is not coherent so far, is what we can say. I'll turn on off my mobile. And we left off at 265. And it was fun to read that article because I do remember once upon a time I was fixated with sharpening my gaze to enter into understanding. My perfect view of a situation where I could understand and really get into the thing was when I sharpened my eyes all the way to myopia and took everything else out of the view. And this is, of course, a good quote here, as Kalle took out here. Thank you very much. But this is how it is, I say to myself over and over again. I feel as though if I only could fix my gaze absolutely sharply on this fact, I get it in focus. I must grasp the essence of the matter. By blocking everything else out of view in our reality, literally, going into our laboratory, fixating on the microscope, leaving everything out of the view, we will be able to get into this mode of understanding. Only then and not before. And this is the modern day of focusing. It's evident in the universities, academia, schooling system. Everything is widely fragmented into small bits so that you can focus 100% on it. The idea is if you take everything else out of the view, and I literally, sometimes it could be literally everything else, we will begin to see clearly. And that the idea to isolate something that Heidegger would call vorhanden, and we get into it more and more, and we tense. Yes, that's not an unnecessary ingredient. That's something that Fisher is into. He means to the letter that the picture causes malady in the person. That he becomes literally sick. not understanding what he is doing, his own language. He is no longer able to the same extent to communicate or speak with others freely and lightly. And this is also the picture is apparently not naturally in the foreground, forcing itself upon me. It seems rather that I must force the picture into being. And I would say that means that our volition, our will, our intention is an important factor. We get mesmerized by the picture and we want it to the foreground. We force it upon us. We think it will quench our thirst for knowledge and understanding. And therefore, we continue to generalize, continue to universalize away reality. And that could lead to all sorts of isolation. I think the analytical philosopher, I would like to say Alan Partridge, but that's not his name, Derek Parfit, he epiphemizes that tendency. He was just focusing on one subject alone. He did not even eat properly. He did not interact to a great extent with others. And it was sheer focus on one thing and no else. Since the world is global, all the relations in the world are global. That will make what you achieve less sharp, less distinct, at the same time as it becomes less global. We will continue where we left off, and no, the size of the text looks quite good. I don't know, maybe a little bit bigger, just slightly. 215, 215. Yeah. It doesn't matter if only half the line is seen. I can still read it. It's a magnificent power I developed when I worked in a newspaper. In paragraph 115, I continue. Each of these features of paragraphs 113 and 14 is suddenly reversed. The picture is no longer something I'm working to create for myself. And it is not I who repeat it over and over again. In paragraph 115, the picture is said to lay in our language. And it is language, not my language or our language, but simply language, which repeats it to us inexorably. Further, there's no longer any effort on my part required to keep the picture before me. The picture now simply is before me, and these reversals indicate that paragraph 115 is not a neutral description of the nature of our language and of how picture lies within it and holds us captive. It is not that is an account of the source and nature of our captivity or bewitchment offered from a position beyond captivity or bewitchment. On the contrary, paragraph 115 is a description offered from within a process of self-captivation and self-bewitchment, which has begun in paragraphs 113 to 14, and it represents a profound deepening of the bewitchment of our own intelligence. Additional support for the claim that in paragraphs 113 to 114, we are involved in self-bewitchment will begin to emerge in the following section when I consider the specific picture that we are working to produce for ourselves. However, I would like to suggest at this point that even without invoking Freud's theorization of repetition and its differences from both remembering and working through, we may recognize our involvement in self-captivation and self-bewitchment in our urgent, repetitive efforts to bring into being a picture which resists our efforts. A picture which is apparently not natural to us or forced upon us. Our self-bewitchment is at one and the same time revealing and expressed in the evident desperation of our repetition of the refrain that the general form of propositions is. This is how things are. It is the fact that by paragraph 115, we are already deeply involved in self-bewitchment that produces the ideas that there is a picture which holds us captive, simply lying in our language, and that language repeats the picture to us inexorably. That is, Wittgenstein means us to recognize paragraph 115 as an explanation that we offer ourselves of our own self-captivating and self-bewitching activity. In paragraph 113 and 114, we project our own urgent repetition of a picture that we are trying to create into language, and in doing so, create for ourselves the idea that there is a picture lying in our language and the phantasm of language which repeats this picture to us inexorably. More specifically, we create for ourselves the phantasm of language as a kind of structure or even a kind of mechanism which contains pictures within itself, and which, because it contains these pictures within itself, mechanistically repeats them to us inexorably. Having projected our own urgent repetition of a picture into language, we then tell ourselves that we have found the picture in language. We tell ourselves that this picture has always been lying in our language, and that the fact of its lying in our language is why we have been captivated by it and why we have been repeating it over and over. Since it lay in our language, we could not do otherwise. Language itself has been repeating the picture to us, and indeed for us, in each proposition that we utter. This explanation that we offer ourselves in paragraph 115 is, however, in bad faith. It denies our role in the production of the picture, of this picture, and of our own captivity, as these have been depicted in paragraph 113 and 114. It locates the source of the bewitchment of our intelligence in a supposed fact about language, and it represents our bewitchment as falling upon us from language. We captivate ourselves with a picture and then tell ourselves that the picture captures us, yes. Furthermore, this explanation profoundly deepens our bewitchment. For in misrepresenting the source and nature of our bewitchment, it leads us to seek release from that bewitchment in a direction in which release is not to be found. In particular, it leads us to conceive of release as coming through a reform of language, or simply, or through simply attaining a greater level of understanding of the workings of our language, apart from working to comprehend and to address what Wittgenstein wishes us to recognize as the source and nature of this expression of our persistent drive to misunderstand. But when we no longer correctly recognize the source and the nature of our difficulties, or the means of their resolution, what hope of release remains? Three, picturing pictures. The interpretation of paragraphs 113 and 115 that I have sketched suggests that, contrary to initial appearances, paragraph 115 does not clearly support the ideas in what I have called the first reading of Wittgenstein's claim that philosophy is a battle against the bewitchment of our intelligence by means of language. Indeed, it suggests a quite specific critique of those ideas. It suggests that we wish to conceive of language as simply containing traps which bewitch our intelligence in order to deny our own active role in the production of those traps and of our bewitchment, in order to, in short, deny our drive to misunderstand. However, the import of these passages is more general and more pervasive. In order to bring out the more general and pervasive import of these passages, I need to highlight an aspect of paragraphs 113 to 114, which I have not to this point specifically emphasized. In particular, the picture we work to create for ourselves in paragraphs 113 to 14 is a picture of the nature and working of language, which Wittgenstein associates with the picture theory of language from the Tractatus. For Wittgenstein of the Tractatus to say that the general form of a proposition is, "This is how things are," is to say that the general form in which language operates is through propositions which have sense and communicate in virtue of picturing states of affairs. Accordingly, in paragraphs 113 to 114, we are working to produce for ourselves and to make secure for ourselves a picture of language as operating through pictures. But why, according to Wittgenstein, do we so insistently want this picture? In order to begin to respond to this question, we need to consider the prior question. How do we imagine or want to imagine that pictures work and carry meaning? Wittgenstein has quite a lot to say about how we are inclined to imagine that pictures work and about why we are drawn to the idea that language operates as we imagine pictures to operate. Here, I want to isolate just two intimately related ideas. Intimately related ideas to which he recurs several times throughout the investigations. The first idea, roughly put, is that the sense or meaning of a picture is absolutely clear and immediately present. Accordingly, if a proposition is a picture, then its sense is also absolutely clear and immediately present. This idea emerges in embryonic form as early as paragraph 6 in Wittgenstein's discussion of ostensive teaching of words. In response to his own question about what might be meant in saying that ostensive teaching of words can be said to establish a connection between the word and the thing. Wittgenstein continues, well, it can mean various things, but one very likely thinks first of all that the picture of the object comes before the child's mind when he hears the word. In paragraph 6, Wittgenstein's discussion moves fairly quickly away from the idea that understanding a word may be a matter of a picture coming before the mind. However, in paragraphs 139 to 41, Wittgenstein returns to this idea and offers a more extensive discussion of the thought that the picture clearly determines sense. In paragraph 139, Wittgenstein is considering a set of questions surrounding the ability to understand a word. He asks, what really comes before our mind when we understand a word? Following this question, there is a long dash, which often indicates a pause to gather thoughts. And then, isn't it something like a picture? Can't it be a picture? The suggestion that what comes before the mind is something like a picture arises in response to the fact that we are often able to understand a word immediately. Or, as Wittgenstein says, in a flash. He remarks, when someone says the word cube to me, for example, I know what he means. Further, I know what he means clearly and immediately. The idea that what comes before the mind is something like a picture suggests itself as an explanation of this transparency and immediacy of understanding. In response to the suggestion that what comes before the mind is something like a picture, Wittgenstein's first move, which is familiar throughout the investigations, is to replace the idea of something like a picture in the mind with an actual picture, in this instance with a drawing on a paper. In making this move, he works to force us to remain faithful to the ways in which actual pictures work, and thus blocks any temptation to explain our ability to understand a word by attributing to the quasi-picture in the mind various mysterious powers. Wittgenstein then continues by raising problems about whether and how an actual picture can account for our understanding. Most centrally, he points out that in order for the picture of the cube in itself to account for our understanding of the word cube, the picture would have to carry within itself the correct method for projecting the picture onto objects. However, the picture itself carries no such method of projection. Wittgenstein asks, in what sense can this picture of a cube fit or fail to fit a use of the word cube? He continues, perhaps you say it is quite simple. If that picture occurs to me and I point to a triangular prism, for instance, and say it is a cube, then this use of the word doesn't fit the picture. But doesn't it fit? I have purposely so chosen the example that it is quite easy to imagine a method of projection according to which the picture does fit after all. Wittgenstein's point here is clearly not that pictures are in general unclear, or that they cannot convey a sense clearly and, in one sense, immediately. Quite often, pictures can and do convey a sense clearly and immediately. And it is just this fact that leads us to imagine that a picture might explain our understanding of a word. Wittgenstein's point is rather that the power of a picture to convey sense clearly and immediately depends upon our understanding how the picture is being used, how it is being applied, and so how the picture is to be taken. This idea is wonderfully illustrated in the following example, which Wittgenstein attaches to his discussion at paragraph 39. I see a picture, he remarks. It represents an old man walking up a steep path, leaning on a stick. How might it not have looked just the same if he had been sliding upwards, downhill, in that position? Perhaps a Martian would describe the picture so. I do not need to explain why we do not describe it so. Often, as in this case, given a background of our familiarity with facts about our world and with what people are likely to wish to convey, it is evident without any special thought how a picture is being used and so how it is to be taken. However, this does not alter the fact that the sense of the picture depends upon our grasp of how it's being used, and the picture does not of itself tell how it's being used. Excellent point there. Put some marks here. That fantastic say. A picture does not of itself tell how it's being used. An excellent and important point that, of course, Augustine completely missed. Well, all of us. I would say there is no one in academia that do not fall for that one. It's impossible until you see it is actually carrying problems with it, grave problems. I have some sites I want to bring to the fore. So we almost began with the paragraphs as 113 and 14 and 115. is also participating. And I like the word self-deception or self-bewitchment. It tells exactly what it is about. There's nothing inherently wrong in language. There are points that are weaker and where it's easier to fall for it. 266. Second paragraph. And this is sort of a criticism of his own writings, not really, but close to it. And that is typical of the zigzag way that Wittgenstein, especially the later one, is writing. He's defending the thing he wants to uncover, so to speak. That's where he begins. And in 115, is in bad faith. It denies our role in the production of this picture and our captivity, as this has been depicted in paragraphs 113 and 14. We go down to the second paragraph. We have a sort of a summary or reformulation. It's only 3 lines down. It locates the source of the bewitchment. It's in the second paragraph. It's a bit up. Other way. Well, down then. Sorry. It denies it locates the source of that bewitchment of our intelligence in a supposed fact about language, and it represents our bewitchment as falling upon us from language. We captivate ourselves with a picture and then tell ourselves that the picture captures us. Furthermore, this explanation profoundly deepens our bewitchment. It's what makes it worse. In Swedish, is we go from the ashes that are hot to the fire. For in misrepresenting the source and nature of our bewitchment, it leads us to seek release from that bewitchment in a direction in which release is not to be found. How utterly important. Plato confessed to his despair. Many others, like Bertrand Russell, and I'd say all of philosophy, continues to go into that direction. And they do what they think is changes. But as we realize from Derrida, modern academia is simply renaming new empty concepts. They all share the same bewitchment and confusion, and the only thing that drives them, and I'll see if I can find that site once more, it was from a German philosopher, I think German-Austrian, I think it was Feyerabend, I'm not sure. The only thing that drives modern academias today is the wish to get out of the personal tortural situation, to get some release. They know that their language is not working. They get poor in knowledge. And I think knowledge is the food for our soul. And if the soul does not get knowledge, it starves and it causes pain. Agony, I would say. It's not very hard to see the agony in Bertrand Russell. He changed direction 12 times. What a pitiful life. Horrible. No consequential acting through his career. If we then go to page 267, and we are currently on page 267. And now we come to another interesting hint. And you find that in the third small paragraph. But why, according to Wittgenstein, do we so insistently want this picture? In order to begin to respond to this question, we need to consider the prior question. How do we imagine or want to imagine that pictures work and carry meaning? So the way we think pictures carry meaning is part of the problem as well. The first problem is that we do not accept that we are the ones who bring the pictures to the foreground. The second is we get stuck in the idea that the pictures themselves depict meaning. As another reason to have a look at the duck rabbit. And if we go to the fifth paragraph, short again, the first idea, roughly put, is that the sense or meaning of a picture is absolutely clear and immediately present. Accordingly, if a proposition is a picture, then its sense is absolutely clear and immediately present. This is a very important part of your or the illusion. And this, of course, so aptly put by Affeldt, this idea emerges in embryonic form as early in paragraph 6 in Wittgenstein's discussion of the ostensive teaching of words. That you can point to something and the person will understand. Well, even if it does understand the pointing gesture, the idea that the person will understand to what is being pointed. Color, surface, weight, relation, or what it is, or what it's named, and millions. I think somebody calculated that the idea that Augustine has pointing actually in a normal case have more than 1 billion different options. So it's of course much more in reality. It is impossible. An object cannot speak for itself at all. But together with the concept, context, intention, volition, it will speak. At the very end of that page, if Kalle, we can go to the end. In paragraph 139, Wittgenstein is considering a set of questions surrounding the ability to understand a word. He asks, what really comes before our mind when we understand a word? Following this question, there is a long dash, which often indicates a pause to gather thoughts. And then, isn't it something like a picture? Can it not be a picture? And further down in paragraph 3, beginning with in, the last word that you can see here. In making this move, he works to force us to remain faithful to the ways in which actual pictures work, and thus blocks any temptation to explain our ability to understand a word by attributing to the quasi-picture in the mind various mysterious powers. Wittgenstein then continues by raising problems about whether and how an actual picture can account for our understanding. More centrally, he points out that in order for the picture of the cube in itself to account for our understanding of the word cube, the picture would have to carry within itself the correct method for projecting the picture onto objects so that it can be perceived properly. However, the picture itself carries no such method of projection. And Wittgenstein asks, in what sense can this picture of a cube fit or fail to fit a use of the word cube? And here's a quote. Perhaps you say it's quite simple if that a picture occurs to me and I point to a triangular prism, for instance, and I say it is a cube, then this use of the word does not fit the picture. But doesn't it fit? I have purposely choosing the example that is quite easy to imagine a method of projection according to which the picture does fit after all. And the last sentence there to clear it a bit more. It's the last paragraph on the next page. And the picture does not of itself oh, go down a bit. It's the last sentence we read on 269. Just a little bit down. A picture does not of itself tell how it's being used. Nothing, no picture, no part of reality can do its own trick by itself. It needs context, it needs concept, words, intentionality, relations, many things. It could very well be that 50 people see the same thing, but that's because they are trained in the same way. So their words are already present. I had an excellent example once of a pygmy tribe in Africa that been living their whole life in the jungle. They were brought out to the savannah, and in the horizon they saw some things moving about, elephants. And they said to the guide, "What are those rare ants?" They had no concept of what it was. Neither did they have a concept of distance, and that things that are small at a distance are actually quite large, like elephants. We know from visual theory, without words and context and communality, that we are sharing. For instance, we in the West, or Wittgenstein as an Austrian, or his group of philosophers, or his friends, or any other group. Kalle, please welcome into the discussion.
To comment on your last anecdote, we could perhaps say that these people were very fractal, because in fractality there is no difference in size.
Yeah, sure.
In order to, so to say, defend them.
Indeed. And the mentioning of fractal is pointing more to what we actually see.
Yes, of course. Here on this is page. Let me see. This is page 268. When so Wittgenstein asks, what happens when we understand a word? Is it something like a picture? Can't it be a picture? We could use Macchilli-Christ to explain to answer this question. Namely, the more you are living in the right side of your brain, more picture-like is your image of a word.
Indeed. Very good.
And let me go here. Here. So Wittgenstein points out that in order for the picture of the cube in itself to account for our understanding of the word cube, the picture would have to carry within itself the correct method for projecting the picture onto objects. So this sentence, if I understand it correctly, demolishes the Platonic world of ideas.
Yes, indeed, yes. And of course, in his own world, he was accustomed to that people saw the same things, that they were sharing life world.
So let's take a concrete example. Imagine this is actually the example that Socrates takes himself. A carpenter. A carpenter will make the bed or a table, and then he will think about the perfect table in the Platonic world. But as the phrase implies here, there is no correct method for presenting the picture of the objects. Because the table can be many different things. It can be three-legged, it can be four-legged, and everything is related to usage. In order to understand a table is a table, there must be somebody actually using it. Let's say in the Platonic world, you have to actually have perhaps a family using a table to understand. I don't know. This is, after all, this phrase is Stephen Affeldt's paraphrase. Do you think I read too much into this phrase?
No, not at all. What Plato was missing out was that the Greek people were sharing life world. So of course they saw the same thing. And there he assumed it is in the picture itself. And that's where he goes wrong. He's under the infatuation of this idea of the picture speaking by itself. Of course, we get accustomed, because if everyone else in your society see the same thing, wouldn't it be wise to make the conclusion, well, the thing itself projects its purpose or its identity. And looking closer to this, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But you really have to look close at it. We need to be careful. There would never, ever not be the slightest chance that Plato would have come to another conclusion. No, there's no chance whatsoever. He would ever have to read Wittgenstein for that to happen.
Yes. Indeed, as we read the last phrase, picture does not of itself tell how it is being used. And I think that is also very important. It was on the last page of 269 where we ended. But let me take up something else here on page 265. It's about pictures keeping us captives. And these pictures can force themselves upon us. So there's this image of pictures holding us captives. Yeah. And I would like to think about the thought experiment, Schrödinger's thought experiment, Schrödinger's cat. Let's say that, speaking of being captive, there you have actually the cat being captive in the box. So before you open the box, the cat can be in 3 different, what do you call it, states. Dead, alive, or both dead, alive. So when I mention Schrödinger's cat to you, you will probably at once project a mental image of this box where you have this 4 cats, and the cat is actually held captive there. So the image is holding you captive, and the image is actually holding a cat captive, to make a pun. But what is interesting is that you need an observer here, so you need to go there and observe, open the box, and then, so to say, the cat is no longer held captive, is free, okay, but they can be dead, but it's free. And also the image is not longer holding you captive in the same sense. Of course, you are still having a mental image, but it's now shifted focus. So you can and return to this phrase by Wittgenstein that we had on previous lecture.
With your permission, let me rephrase that, and you can also say that the Platonic idea and any other philosophy, we need to know that all philosophers makes the same conclusion here, always ends with language is not necessary, because all of the Greeks saw a table when somebody, Augustine, let's say, was pointing to the table. And they all readily understood why he was painting, to what he was painting, and so forth. That would make the next step of the illusion, and that is that no language is necessary, and no observer, no thinking, no prior, and that we could be completely blank slates. No prior, no priming, no, so to speak, starting point. But reality in some weird way is out there.
Yes, indeed. And we could say that images hold Plato captive. Quite literally, he was dependent on them. He thought that they were something superior, while language was something bad,
Yes.
So in a way, Plato put language in a box
Yeah.
because it was bad. It had to be kept captive.
Mhm.
So he had actually put two things in a box, two things that he held captive.
Well,
We could say that to sum up, so to say, Schrodinger's cat. So before you gaze, before you could say that gazing sharply, that is when the superposition collapses. Before you gaze, you still have things in superposition. So cat can be both dead and alive, and the cat is still captive and so forth.
Yeah.
So everything's about the gazing or not gazing.
Yeah.
The not gazing is also absolutely wonderful because it gives you more options.
Indeed.
Mm.
The sharp gaze of something will end in a sort of an object. This is my proposal only.
Absolutely. And you need the sharp.
I think you can see that. I don't know if Affeldt agree with me here, but it's a bit that sharp gaze will end with an object that are a bit more isolated, so to speak.
Yeah, yes, you need that sharp gaze. For instance, when you go and examine the cat is not moving, it could be sleeping or is it dead. So you need that sharp, or rather a tender gaze, perhaps observing gaze that looks. But there you have to, so to say, collapse the superposition and have only one option, so to say.
Yeah, indeed. Before the gaze, you have more options, and of course, there could be. When it comes to a cube, you can see cube from at least 7 different ways. I think it's much more. So you will collapse everything into just one of the ambigram. We must remember that the most used ambigram in later Wittgenstein by his interlocutors, the duck rabbit, has one problem to it. It's only two things, but mostly it's up to infinity of different ways of seeing something.
Well, perhaps we should end there. Hans.
Well, I thank you very much, Kalle Lundahl, for your excellent comments and sharing today. And thank you everyone for being here today, listening in. And I wish you a very nice morning, day, afternoon, or night, wherever you are. And I stop the recording here. Bye.